Hello, everyone. Welcome to another lovely episode of the Future of Team podcast. I am joined by my amazing, lovely, wonderful, inspirational co-host,
Oh,
Teal,
stop.
all the way from sunny, I assume it's sunny, Melbourne, Australia down there.
Well, it's very early in the morning and the sky is very grey so far, so I'm not holding out hope. We're in that transitional period where we're going from summer when it is sunny all the time to autumn. And I live in Melbourne and it rains a lot here anyway.
Yeah.
But it's a
You
good
get four
day and it's
seasons in a
early in the
day.
day.
Isn't that Melbourne? 4 seasons in a day?
Always. 100%.
Oh, well, today we thought we would tackle the thing that every task or business oriented leader is keen to see in their workplace, which is a high performance culture where
Oh my God,
everyone
just
is
the way you're
pulling their weight.
saying it. It's making me anxious. Stop.
Oh, yes. We will stop right there because if you came here expecting to get all the secrets to make your team work harder, run faster, and be more profitable, well, they may be more profitable, but they're not going to be necessarily working faster or working harder or any of those other things because that, at least in my opinion, is not what a high performance culture is all about.
I agree. I completely agree. Yeah, sorry. I'm still coming down off the anxiety of that introduction.
That's a pretty big opening, wasn't it? It was
It
a
is.
lot of drama.
It is. I mean, we hear about it a lot. What is a high performing team? Um, and I think as people start talking about it, as people are kind of floating the idea, because I understand from a business perspective, you want people to be working at their best. You want them to, you want to be able to deliver your products and your services efficiently and profitably. All of those make total sense. And so the environment that you're creating in which people do that is critically important. And I think that's, if I'm not mistaken, that's what we're talking about today. How do we create that kind of environment? And is it a case of, I mean, when you use language like that, high performance, what does that actually mean? Are we all, athletes training for the Olympics, or is there some other way of looking at it? Because I hear that, and my first, as you've already seen, my first response is anxiety. Oh, crumbs, you know. So, so what do we mean by that?
The sigh, the big sigh.
Yeah.
It is a loaded term, and I think for those who have experienced work trauma around high performance culture, it's not real. I mean, let's be clear. There's a high performance culture is it's in the eye of the beholder. It's what I
Right.
decide is high performance. It's what you decide is high performance. And I think probably where a lot of the friction in high performance culture comes from is a lack of alignment between the executive team, the leadership team, the middle managers, the team leads, and the individual contributors as well. We've all come to the table with a different understanding of what high performance means. For some of us, that's task. For some of us, that's outcomes. For others, it might be revenue, right? Like or some other
Mm,
thing,
sure.
and so because of that, in my opinion, it's the easiest thing to cause burn and churn, right, with
Mm.
your team. So
I
yeah.
feel like, those interesting, the idea of what those motivations are going to be different for different sectors in the company, right? Obviously, for the CEO and for the CFO, that revenue is critically important. For an individual contributor, I want to be sitting in my seat with all of the tools provided to me to do my best work. I want to be motivated to do my best work, and that motivation is different for other people. For some people, they might be competitive, and this idea of high performance doesn't freak them out like it does me. My motivation I want to be excellent at what I'm doing, and I want the people that I'm working with to feel great around me and what I'm working towards. And so I think there's, and some, depending on the people at that C level and the motivation there, if they are also seeing that creating that space for me to be able to operate in that way is as critical to that revenue as how many calls that I make in sales, or how how much happier what the how much happier my clients are. I don't know. Those are that's the thing that I sit there and look at, because I'm such a people focused person. Is okay. So how do I make sure that that environment for me is motivated to succeed? How do, and so there's a whole space of talking about how people get motivated. I think that factors into this in some way, maybe.
I wonder as well if you mentioned early on that it looks different to different layers or different levels of a company. And I wonder if it's almost like OKRs, where you have like KPIs or child OKRs that flow into it or lead into it. If I put my CEO hat on or my
Sure.
C-suite hat on and think about it at that level, if I was going to try to define a high performance team or high performance culture, it's one where I can predict output or outcomes with a high degree of accuracy.
Interesting. Okay.
So what is most important to me is that if I set revenue projections, or if we have
Sure.
delivery goals or
Yeah.
whatever, that the resourcing, the people and the teams that I have in place can deliver to what we expect
Yeah.
consistently
Yeah.
and predictably and within such a high degree of accuracy that I can then plan the next thing. And it becomes very, to me, like that's the motors running. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I love that approach, or I love that. This is why it's so helpful for me to have you, because you have the business head. I have I'm the nurturing. I want all my team to feel safe, and and not to say that you don't have that at all, but you also add that layer of, oh yeah, we're in a company and we need to be thinking about these things too. So that's really helpful for me, and I think, to come back to, with all of that in mind, then that level, thinking about what are the things that actually make that predictability
Yeah.
possible. Does the delivery team have everything that they need to do to be able to deliver? If there are hiccups or frictions or things that are preventing that team from performing be able to, at that level, to be able to give that predictability, what is going on there and what do I need to do to unlock that? Because I hear high performance and think that's a stick that I'm waving,
Yeah.
when in actual fact, it's not that at all, or it ought not to be that at all. I'm sure there are unhealthy teams in which that is the case, but that whole sense of, what do we need to do to unlock those teams to be able to achieve what they need to, what we need them to, for the business.
And I think when we start to look at it from that lens, right, consistency, predictability with a high degree of accuracy, and let's just go with that for the purpose of this conversation.
Sure.
Um, as you said, like that's that trickle down effect, because what I want as a team lead is to be able to accurately, estimate a project cost or delivery
Sure.
timeline or whatever it is. And I am looking at the factors that go into that. And it's not just output, it's not just task.
No, not at all.
Because
Yeah.
if I'm burning through my team, or if I've got so and so at risk of leaving, or whatever is going on, or there's a conflict bubbling up, those are all KPIs, in my opinion, that I need to be conscious of and thinking about, because they impact our ability on that consistency side, on that predictability side, because we're adding in all of these things that get in the way. So
Mm.
yeah, that's if I was to sort of think about what like a healthy high performing culture is, that's the picture I have in my head, is that
Yeah.
because it's not just task. If I'm burning my folks out, or if I'm creating conflict, or if the tasks we're asking them to do can't possibly be done in the time that we've allotted for it, and we don't have a feedback mechanism to bring that
Mm.
forward, or there's no project management or scope, analysis or whatever we need in order to make that all work, like
Yeah.
you can see how all of those little things become opportunities to grow that high performance team or high performance culture.
Yeah.
Ah,
Yeah, for
what
sure.
I don't know. I just that's my look at it. So
I love it.
so we've got a couple of different thoughts on this. So we've talked about sort of what we think it is, what we think a company is saying. We've obviously both probably had experiences where it has not been great. But one of the things that we've listed down here in our little show notes or whatever is this idea of defining and communicating your cultural vision as being one of the key aspects of creating or cultivating a high performance culture. So I'm curious if you've got any stories or experiences where a high performance team or a high performance culture has actually done the work of defining and communicating a cultural vision that you can get behind.
I've worked in organizations that have vision, that have values, that have a mission statement, that this is where we're going to go, and then had high performance being folded into that. So when the so then it becomes this sense of that becomes part of the bigger picture rather than the big picture. Um, and it's when you're starting to introduce this kind of idea of us being a high performing team into an existing organization or into an existing culture, that you come up with that friction that we already talked about, or that anxiety that I already showed off, because it's a case of actually getting people onto that same page, and the understanding of what the expectations you have around that are becomes critically important to the success of how that I think how that actually rolls out.
So typically when we talk about culture, one of the things that happens is, especially in the world of HR and organizational development, we take we attempt to systematize culture, define it, right? We might create value statements. We might have, different indicators through surveying or tooling that we use to help us measure that. And I wonder if part of what we can bring, so if we take off our big company hat and put our small company hat on, where you don't
Sure.
have an HR team, you've got to think about
Mm-hmm.
this for the first time, like how we actually set up culture to be measured, I think plays a big role in how we define and communicate culture and our cultural vision to folks. And I have
Mm-hmm.
a bit of a story on this. This happened a lot toward the latter end of my time at Envato. I'm naming names. I hope that's okay. I loved my time at Envato. Wasn't all great, wasn't all peaches, but overall there were lots of good
Sure
things to
thing.
take away. And I think like one of the things we used to do is we would do these reviews of quarterly reviews or whatever, and we would be evaluated on our adherence to cultural values.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were when we were reviewing others or when others were reviewing us, we would always be asked the question, what one or two of our 6 or 7 values have you seen this quarter from
Mm.
so and so?
Yeah.
And by systematizing values and systematizing culture in that way and attaching, some type of measure or some type of evaluation to it, it actually created an indicator, a KPI
Yeah.
for all layers of the business to get a sense of how we
Yeah.
were tracking on, the culture, not just the work, but the culture.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had that experience as well. In one of my roles, the whole performance framework or the feedback mechanism that we had was structured specifically. The whole thing was structured specifically around our listed values. So each section was specific to one of those particular elements of our values. It was helpful.
Yeah. And I think it actually puts a different kind of, not pressure, but um, role for leadership when it comes to how they are involved in the process of, creating culture, cultivating culture, because they have to move beyond values that are platitudes, like we work great together, and we
Yeah.
we're adventurous, and these values
Yeah.
that don't actually mean anything in the day to day.
Yeah.
They don't connect to the culture or help to explain the culture. Um,
Yeah.
and that's an interesting thing. I've gone from really strong cultures with these measures in place to ones where the only time you ever hear the values is in your orientation or your onboarding, and then they
Mm.
disappear
Yeah.
and you never
Yeah.
hear about them again. And the difference in culture is obvious, right? The
Yeah.
difference in dynamic between folks and the teams is very apparent. So for leadership, this is such a huge thing, I think, is to actually, like, if you're going to be spending your time on anything in terms of creating a high performance culture, it's in defining values that make sense and
Yeah.
then figuring out how you're going to measure it and then systematize it so that everyone on your team can be involved in those conversations over and over
Yeah.
again.
Well, and people know what to expect. I think one of the beautiful things of working in an organization that is so very clear about what their values are and so very strategic about how those values are embedded, I think is probably the right word, within the company and within the practice of the company. Uh, there's a safety net there, right? Is
Mm.
that if you're a contributor or a manager or a leader in a company like that, and you know that this is what our culture is, and this is how we live and breathe our culture, and our culture is geared towards giving us the space and the tools that we need to be able to perform at our best. And there's a safety in that. You know what's expected. You know when you haven't hit the mark. Ideally and hopefully, there is also a mechanism to restore that balance when you haven't met the mark for whatever reason.
Now, coincidentally,
Mm-hmm.
as we're chatting, I am looking at Envato's About Us page and looking at
Oh
their
yeah.
values. And I did this because I thought to myself, oh, I want to go and just do a bit of a refresher. They've changed their values. They've gone
Have they
from
now?
7 or 8 values that I heard every day, all day, to 5 that are more in those platitude style. So very interesting. They used to have a value, tell it like it is, which was
Right.
one about, you know, uh, honesty, transparency, right?
Yeah.
Feedback, and a
Yeah.
willingness to stand up for something if you felt it was not going the way it's supposed to. That value is completely gone. There is nothing even close to it. But we can build our future,
And
right? So, yeah,
what does that mean?
it's we acknowledge the past while we build our future and seize opportunities to evolve and disrupt. It would be really interesting to talk to alumni of a company like Envato, where, especially in the very early days, those values, that was what bound us together. Like all of us, we would have different perspectives and come from different, ways of life and working styles. Those values were the glue that helped us get from, no author earnings to over $1 billion in author earnings. And to see how that's
Wow.
changed now and softened, I wonder, well, clearly there's a lot of intentionality behind it, but I wonder what that intentionality is, and if people who lived out those earlier values would be on board or upset by this transformation of values, and what feels a little bit like
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
softening or a graying of those values.
Dilution.
Yeah. See? Culture, cultivation, the role of leadership there.
Fascinating.
It's these are the things. Um, so that's why it's important, right? And it's also why it's important that if you're going to make changes to your values, that is a journey the whole team is involved in,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, so that's the strategy side of it. I think now we can probably um, jump into a bit more practical. Like, okay, so we've got these values. The leadership team has agreed to them, or the founder has agreed to them, and we're happy with them because they are about identifying or solidifying our culture. We've identified KPIs for these. How do we embed culture into, or this high performance kind of culture thing into our day to day operations, so that we can move from, a task oriented place or whatever, to this one that we've talked about, where a healthy culture is one where we've got, consistent, predictable, and accurate outcomes.
So we have a clear definition of what performance is
Yeah.
in um oh, I mean, this starts to become feels quite big, right? For
Mm.
me, it's this case of so we know what performance looks like. We have embedded that in a sense of here's where we're going. The team and the company are on board with how we're getting there. We have the structure in place to support people being able to perform, and that they have all the tools that they need. They have the space and the time that they need. They have management support. And I guess for me, some of the kind of critical parts of this are in how, and again, I'm thinking from the perspective of kind of larger companies where there is a management layer. Maybe you can speak a bit more to what you would, how you would kind of approach this when you don't necessarily have that. But that sense of working with the team that you're managing, with your individual contributors around what does success and what does performance look like for you, and having a structure in place to how we check in on that. And so this is, you have your one-to-ones, and that you're working through. And this is not a check-in where you're going in to see if you're measuring up. This is a check-in where you're going in to see how that environment is either helping or hindering you to perform in the way that you need to in order to be able to meet the goals that your team has. And for me, for the most part, that's been agency teams, delivering software for our clients. Uh, and that there is so the structure for me around this has always been, we have quarterly reviews. 2 of those through the year will be peer reviews, where your peers get to have, and where you get to have an opinion of, and express feedback around your peers, and how they're tracking in terms of this performance. And then 2 of those that are how your performance is actually going, and how your manager sees those things. So that, for me, that's some of the kind of bare bones practical baseline stuff that we're doing. What needs to happen, or what for that to flourish, there needs to be a culture within the company where people feel safe to give and receive feedback. I think that's kind of one of the critical parts of it.
Well, let's take that. So, we're saying that we want to create or cultivate a high performance culture. And in a high performance culture, we get honest feedback in a timely way. We have identified that is a KPI, right?
Right.
We are getting honest feedback in a timely way, because you can never correct soon enough, right? If you're going down the wrong track.
Right.
Just from a cost and risk and all of those kinds of things. So there's very practical reasons why you would want to have that. But as a KPI, that becomes something that you look at a leadership level, either as an individual or, as a group of team leads, for example, because you can easily ask the question, am I getting honest feedback in a timely way? Right?
Yeah.
No, I didn't hear about that problem until 2-3 weeks later. Well, why is that? Is that
consistent? Or 3 months later when your review comes around. Yeah.
So if I'm not getting feedback, or if I'm not getting any kind of coaching, or, we're not hearing about problems until long after they have become a problem, and folks are aware of that, we know we've got a breakdown here in our high performance culture that we need to take a look at. So how do we, I would say if we're looking at practical strategies, you need to have clarity around what those things are. And I mean, that's, it's a bit arbitrary, because you're not going to be able to assign a number hard and fast, right? Or very accurately to that. It's not like you can bring up a data point on it, but you can, you just make it. But if that's happening, then you're looking at psychological safety, right? And you're going, okay, clearly we don't have enough of that in our culture to do that. Yeah. So as a lead, whether that's a team lead of individual contributors, or even in the larger group, right? You might have one team or 2 teams that are doing that, and one team that's not doing that. It's awesome when that happens, because you know where you have to do your work, right?
Yeah.
And the plan forward is very, very clear. I need to help this team lead create more psychological safety, so they're getting the right information at the right time, right? For all of us moving forward. So one-on-ones are good. Quarterly reviews are good. All of that kind of stuff helps with that specific thread. But I connected back to that, like our value is we're a place where you have the space and the safety to give and receive feedback, right?
Yeah,
and
makes
we
sense.
know that exists because of this. So for those of you who are listening or watching, right? Like, in my mind, if I'm creating culture, or if I'm going into an organization and I'm trying to help them become a high performing culture, these are the kinds of things I'm looking at. It's not about task, right?
Not at all.
That is actually the furthest thing from my mind, because task and outcome, right? Or task and delivery, that's all or output, if you will, is all the result of what happens here. And my indicators of health in that space come from what I see in these other things.
Yeah. What are those other things?
We talked about psychological safety. We've talked about the right information in the right time. What are some other things that I would be looking at? Uh, do people have the tool? You said it. Do people have the
Mm.
tools that they need to do the job they're being asked to do?
Yep.
Right? Do they, whether that's equipment, physical equipment like the right computer, the software, the training,
Sure.
right? To be able to do what they need to do. If we get a project, it's a large enterprise or not even an enterprise project. Let's go a bit more basic. We're doing a website for the National Arts Center in Melbourne or whatever, right? Like
Yeah.
National Art Gallery. And the National Art Gallery has this website. It's big. It's got all these moving parts. We're migrating from some ASP.NET thing that their old IT team put together because they thought that was the way to go, over to this really awesome performant, WordPress driven
Of course.
website.
Yeah.
This doesn't sound like a real thing at all. um, and yet we've got nobody on the team who's ever worked in .NET or anything like that, and somehow they've got to figure out how to migrate this thing. Well, we've got to do
Mm.
training, we've got to, or hiring, or
Mm.
whatever it takes, and so those become the indicators for me. Is it
Yeah.
So I would say there's those kinds of things, and how you measure those things becomes important too. We talk about engagement surveys. There's lots of ways. You have got to find these tools, whether you create them or you outsource them to others, to get this kind of feedback, especially as a
Right.
leadership team, because
Yeah.
you will always be, as the senior leader, you will always be the last person to find out that there's a problem,
Right.
because
Yeah.
everyone's
That's
afraid
fair.
of you. Everyone's trying to solve the problem ahead of you, right?
And
Like,
yeah.
all these things are going on. So you will always be the last person to hear about it. So if you don't have tools in place to sort of draw these things out, or that build that culture, especially in the
Yeah.
early days, you're stuck. You're going to be operating blind. So yeah.
I think it's really, really easy to get stuck on the measuring of being output. How quickly did we deliver? Did we deliver to scope? Did we deliver to budget? Those, and again, I come from an agency background, and so those are all the things. And I guess those things also become factors in the delivery of a product. There are other factors around a product, but I think it's really easy to get caught up in those output metrics and forget the metrics and measurement around some of those other things. And you mentioned engagement surveys, and I've seen enormous value in being able to see improvement in a team from the first engagement survey to the third engagement survey, and being able to introduce things, simple things like a progression framework. Well, it's not simple, but at its core, this whole idea of I know where my career is going, make a noticeable percentage increase in the engagement of team with the company, because I can see a future here for me. I can see a path. So fascinating from my perspective, and so some of the things that you can learn just by measuring how engaged your team is with your company.
One of the things that I always thought was really cool, at one of the places I worked, is they would have 2 or 3 of their annual goals, right, be about business results, product, that kind
Sure.
of stuff. They always had one of their high level business level goals being around people and culture.
Yeah.
Whether that was, we want to elevate the level of our management competency, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or whatever it was, right? They always did that. And so, we talk a little bit about trying to embed culture in our daily operations and this high performance mindset in our daily operations. And if you are not, here's another statement: if you are not evaluating your managers or holding your team leads and your leadership team accountable for people and culture stuff, for culture stuff, they will never
Mm,
do it. If
right.
their job performance is not tied to the things that you say matter in culture, they'll never
Yeah.
do it. So that's
Yeah.
another thing to think about as well from a very practical point of view, right?
Mm.
Finding those things that motivate.
Oh, I just had a thought, and I'm sitting here going, "Is this the?" Anyway, the thought is, because this feels like I mean, to do this all the time. This feels like another podcast, but this also goes to hiring and promoting, and the people that you are putting into those management roles, and hiring and bringing people in that actually see and value that element of what a manager is. It's not just getting that output, it's the holistic view of how, of the culture, which is also for me part of how you actually look after the team that you're managing.
You can see
Kind of.
it too. Like when I mean when I interview folks, you hear it in how they talk, right? When I've been interviewed, it's probably the reason why I haven't been hired in a few spots is because I'm not talking about, the, you know, annual turnover that I brought to the business or whatever, like whatever these big, number oriented results are, because I'm always talking about, well, our team was really good at, communicating with each other. And I worked really hard to develop this kind of culture or this kind of experience because
Yeah.
that's the kind
Yeah.
of leader I want to be. And if you find those people who think that way, oh, don't ever let them go. Hire them, pay them what they want, and never let them go. In my
Yeah.
opinion, as somebody who is like that, you can do that for me. No, I'm
Yeah, for
kidding.
sure.
But, these are like, but I think like they're the ones that are going to cultivate and curate the culture for you,
Yeah.
right? Which frees you up as a senior leader to focus on those other things like
Yeah.
where's revenue coming from? Where's the next, innovation stream going to go? And what's our product line looking like next year and pricing strategy or whatever it is that you need to consider, in your role.
I think it also helps steer, I think, of, the leadership and management development that I have been privileged to be a part of or to have been given is also not just helping grow and elevate that aspect of my leadership or of my management style or of my role, but also like being able to see or to have the company say, can absolutely see your value in this area. Here are some of the areas that we do want you to develop in, which isn't which is some of that kind of more critical business system, more critical. I think both are critical, but some of that more business system orientated information that goes, you also need to be mindful of this while you're also being mindful of your team and your contributors and how, because I know I'm very, very focused one way to the exclusion of the other. And part of my development was that exclusion element. It's like, actually don't exclude that. It needs to inform what you're doing. But um, and so I think there's scope for development for people who probably err too far the other way to actually also know, I need you
Mm.
to be mindful of the culture and how that affects what those bottom lines look like as well.
Yeah, because I'm the opposite of you. You lean people, I lean task as my
Yeah.
natural inclination. And we've talked about this I think before about how both of us have had to learn the other side and learn to lean into the other side
Yeah.
to find that balance. I as a team lead or as a manager, even as a CEO to a lesser extent in smaller companies, but like these are the constraints of your KPIs too, right? Like if I know I've got budget constraints or I've got scope constraints or project time constraints. All of that stuff helps me to get clarity around where I need to prioritize.
Sure.
Right? So if I lean into task and everything's getting done, but I'm at risk of losing my people, or, information is not coming up fast enough. And so even though they're finishing a task, they're not telling me about problems with it until 2 weeks later. Then we have to go back, right, and redo things. That's going to impact the business side, but it also impacts that culture side. And I need both of those measures and both of those constraints well articulated by my leaders for me to be effective as a manager, right? And also as an individual contributor. So, well, I wish we could keep going because, you and I get going and I can't believe we've spoken for as long
I've got to go to work. I've got to go to work.
We spoke for half an hour before we even started this, and we were
I
just
know.
It was great.
Too good. So good.
So thank you so much for being here, for listening. Hopefully you got something out of this. One of the things for me was that definition, at least for me, of what I would consider a healthy high-performance culture, right? If you don't remember what it is, let me see if I can pull it up and articulate it. It is a consistent, predictable... What did I say? Consistent, predictable.
Is it repeatable?
No, I don't.
Reproducible?
It was consistent.
Pull us out in the edit.
Yeah, I will have to pull it out of the edit. Consistent, predictable, with a high degree of accuracy.
Yeah, there it is.
Right?
Yeah.
Outcomes or output.
Yeah.
Right? That's what it was. It was consistent and predictable outcomes with a high degree of accuracy. As a senior leader, that's what I'm looking for in a high performance culture, because that allows me to plan better and I'm not getting surprised and everybody's doing well, right? And there's consistency, all of those kinds of things. One thing I didn't get to say, and I know we're out of time, but I'm going to say this now anyways. There's something about, as an individual contributor, that desire to go to work and do my best and be my best and not go crazy and not be stretched too thin and not have these, ups and downs. Like, I don't need somebody to go in at 110% or 120% all the time. If you consistently give me 80%, right? Like, that is consistent, predictable, with a high degree of accuracy, the output and the outcomes I'm going to get out of you. Oh, that's way better for me.
Yeah, I can see that.
Thank you all for being here. Love to hear your thoughts. Tell us, leave a comment, randomly tweet at us, or I guess it's not tweet at us anymore, or send us
what do you even call that now?
Or wherever wherever you're hearing this podcast, feel free to give us your insight and your input. We would love to hear that. Like, subscribe, share, all those things that you do with something like this. We'd love to build an audience around these thoughts and this way of thinking and these leadership ideals and goals. Any final thoughts from you, Dee?
No, go forth and prosper.
There we go. We thank you all for tuning in. Next episode that we're filming, if we do it in the right order, is all about feedback and performance, and we're starting a 3-episode mini series or mini arc where we're going to tackle it in 3 different aspects, and I'm really excited about that. And so stay tuned for that. It's going to be a lot of fun. Thanks all.
Thank you. See you next time.